Hello students, this is Dr. Deb Watry. I want to give you a quick update on your week 4 writing that literature review. I'd just like to let you know that all of you have been doing a very good job. Great work I've seen from you so far, and I encourage you to keep it up. I think this is a great group of students. Referring you back to week 4, just note at the end of this past week, this is where I put additional resources for you for chapters 2 and 3. So we have chapter 6 to read. There's one little PowerPoint in there for you to take a look at. This is the base of your week's work, chapter 2, literature review. Literature review is probably one of the larger chapters in your thesis. It's approximately 10 pages long. And this is where you present the research that you've read on your article to support your problem in focus. So I always say consider it like writing a research paper where you'll have all the basic parts. You'll have an introduction, the body of your literature review, which will be in 3 sections, and then you provide a summary. So it could be a standalone chapter. And then a short discussion posting for you is coming up this week. So in just taking a look at the readings, do carefully read chapter 6. Your introduction literature review will follow the BWE text and will follow what you've written in your introduction part chapter of your thesis. This is the Word document here is only about a 2-page item for you to take a look at, and this is a short video for you. I went back and pulled out the listings for chapter 2 and 3. You should be using this the research template here, but this is an overview again to supplement the BWE text and what's good and poor literature review. I want you to be thinking ahead for your last chapter, and that's the methodology chapter, because you have to decide as you read that chapter in BWE what type of approach are you going to use. So this is a review of all the methods. This is when do you do quantitative, when do you qualitative. This is another one very similar. Some of you will be doing a mixed method, meaning you're using both quantitative and qualitative when you're looking at the design of your research. So the last 2 resources are examples of mixed methods. One thing you want to do as you decide what method you're going to use is to go back and say in chapter 1, the purpose of this research, and add the word of this quantitative research, of this qualitative research, or mixed method research. Your readers need to know right away in chapter 1 what design you're using. So as you're thinking about that, you want to go back and make that change in chapter 1. So looking at what's the literature review, you already had 2 articles where you annotated it or did a critique, and that's the purpose of looking at research, so you know what to look for and what to pull out of there as you write your literature review. You will have approximately 6 to 8 additional, and you can have more, resources of research on the topic. And remember, in chapter 1 you laid that out in 3 areas, so you should have at least 2 other research articles in those areas to support your topic. This is a Word doc. If you haven't put it into a Word doc, 12-point font, Times New Roman, and with a 1-inch margin. So you want to follow this criteria throughout your entire paper. Anything else I want to point out here? APA format. I'll talk a little bit about it in this presentation, but you want to make sure that you follow the criteria, and you have a lot of resources for doing APA format. Putting in page numbers you want to start thinking about. So in that first week there's a lot of resources for you. How do you space? How do you do that reference page? So as you're writing chapter 2, the literature review, anything that you put in chapter 2 that you haven't listed yet in your references, you have to go back in and add that in your references, and this reference page will be updated, and you attach it when you send in chapter 2, and make sure that you follow the APA format. There are student samples, so take a look, see how they wrote chapter 2, and you can see how they designed and organized it. So this assignment is worth 10 points. We're looking for a good solid 8 to 10 pages. From the BWE text, okay, as you read chapter 6, but this was set up in doing that introduction chapter. You have 3 areas, 3 subheadings. So the BWE text, you're going to set up your literature review in a very similar format, using this as part 1, part 2, part 3 of your literature review, and you have an introduction and you'll have a summary. So taking a look at the literature review, this is, you start out, and do write this 2 out. I think in the BWE text they give you that information also, and I would like to see the numbers written out, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and so on. So you start out with an introduction, basic introduction. Do not put a subheading here. You just start, give a couple of paragraphs to lead the reader into your topic, and then your 3 areas. So as I'm doing as an example of my subheading, this probably might be about 2 pages long, or 2 or more pages, I would say, for each subheading, because I have at least two other places of research that deal with this subheading. So I'm going to take time, like I'm writing that critique or bibliography, and laying out that research. What was the design? Talk a little bit about what the data they collected, how they analyzed it. So you do that for each one of them, and then your summary does have a subheading. This is where you pull things together. What's the synthesis of this, this, and this? Okay, and then what did you find as you take a look at this? What were the gaps that you found that is missing? That then you tie that into your research. That's the gap you're going to start working on. Always at the end of every chapter, do a page break. Okay, do a page break, because that then will mean your chapter 3 methodology will be on a fresh new page. So every chapter starts on a new page in your thesis. So a little bit about the introduction. Okay, so I would say the first paragraph is where you're going to talk about the topic again. In every chapter you write in your thesis, you want to make sure your reader knows what is the problem, what is the topic you're dealing with, what's your research question, because someone could just take your chapter 2 and then they have no idea, well, what's the problem, what's the focus? You didn't tell me that right at the beginning of your chapter. And the same with chapter 3 or chapter 4, they're kind of standalones. So you want to make sure your reader knows as you get into that chapter what the problem is and what you're dealing with. So the second paragraph, I would say, in your, and it can be longer, but I suggest 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph is where you lay out the design of this chapter. The first part of this chapter will be put in the subheading and say what's in there. Second part of the chapter, so that deals with a paragraph or 2 after it. Again, no heading as you start these 2 paragraphs or more. I would suggest putting in a quote, using some citations, something that you pull out important, and that kind of makes your research jump out right away in the beginning. As you write at the end now, you do write a summary paragraph, and you do the synthesis of all the research findings in your literature chapter, and then how this research that you're doing is going to be important and contribute to that field of knowledge. So there is a heading, can be 1 or more paragraphs. Again, as I gave you this information, use some quote and citations. The last sentence leads into chapter 3. Okay, in every chapter 1 through 4 in your thesis, always the last sentence of the chapter, present what's coming up next. So we have chapter 3, remember we're writing the number out. Chapter 3 presents, chapter 3 describes. Okay, so get that in your last sentence in your summary paragraph. Chapter 2 is written in past tense. You cite the previous research in your article. They're already finished. It's already published. So it's already in the past. Okay. Chapter 3 and 4 also written in past tense. So this is the same slide as we had last week. I wouldn't write reports. I need past tense. Smith reported. Here, one, I wouldn't write shows. Previous research shows. We want to say because that research is already completed, previous research showed. Again, a reference to ETAL. You can only use ETAL after you've listed your authors more already the first time. So you have to list all the authors the first time and then you can use ETAL. Make sure you have that page break. I know I talked about that last week with doing your references. Okay, so the references are cited in the research only. So I do a double check. If you've cited in your paper, I look to see if it's in your reference page. And then I do a little check as I'm going through. And if there's something in your reference page that's not cited in your research, that is a major APA error. Those two must match up. So we had this slide last week. And again, I'd like to refer you to APA Citation Basics, a good resource I put in there. I think it's in that first week under the APA resources. And there are 3 examples. I just pull out this one to note right away in that beginning paragraph, you want to tell the reader what was the source as you're doing that literature review. If this was a longer paragraph, I'd probably put a break in between and say it again. And at the end of that paragraph, you put it in at the end of the paragraph. So here's an example of it cited twice. If you look at the APA Citation Basics, there's 3 examples of how you cite. So again, all your cited sources must be in your references. If when I get your draft and you see this, so say I thought you needed to put a citation here, okay? I will probably just highlight that and write this word source, meaning you need to do a citation at that spot. Be careful with punctuation. That always goes at the end. I put in some this reference page for you to talk a little bit about what if you take a government document. And this is No Child Left Behind, and I would want to make sure if I did after previously, first time you want to write out the document, No Child Left Behind, but anywhere else in your paper you can use that NCLB. This is a government document, so it is italicized. And you need to tell where you retrieve that from, okay? So this is a government document. This is just a regular citation. Be careful of where the punctuation goes. Articles, again, do not capitalize the words in the article. And I have to apologize again because this should be italicized as I copied and pasted over from the other text or resource. I didn't italicize this. So journal articles get italicized, and I will be looking for that DOI number. If it doesn't have a DOI number, I have to put the web page for School Psych International. Some of you will be taking things off of your state report cards, and this is an example of something taken from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Okay, and it was a report on the school report and where they retrieved this report from. So you must do that citation. I want to look ahead. The IRB application won't be in week 6, it will be in week 5. So if you take a look at it right here, it's an assignment that goes in week 5. There's some in week 6. There is some explanation. I think I might go in and move it back up to week 5. But you are doing a declaration of exempt form. I talked with the IRB committee chair and said that it's way too much for you to do a full IRB, which is about 5 pages long. And if you did a full IRB, you have to have your parent consent letter, all your surveys, checklists, whatever you're going to be using in your study already put together. And we definitely aren't that far in our research to do that. So you'll be doing a declaration of exempt form. And notice why I'm going to move it up is because it's due November 30th. Okay, the IRB committee only meets a couple of times a year. They will meet December 3rd, and then they will not meet until February. So that's why I need to move this assignment up. When you do that IRB application, it is not as challenging as doing a full IRB, and you don't have to have any of the accompanying consent letters and data collection devices there. So it will only take an hour or so for you to put together, but we need to move that date up because the committee chair said that if she gets them by November 30th, that will be fine for their committee, and that gives them a couple of days to disperse it. So please note, the IRB generally, they need a 10-day lead-in, and she was comfortable with having you put that in there by November 30th. So it's a declaration of exempt status. That's the form that you use. This would be the full IRB. Okay, so I do have that link right in your course text. It's here, and I think I listed it below here. You are in charge of getting it in by November 30th. If it doesn't get there by November 30th, you may not get approved by December, in early December. So you're going to complete the form. It's a fillable PDF, so make sure you fill it out and that you save it. You also must send this to the IRB committee, and I believe I have their website in here twice. Once is down below here in your course shell. You also must send them a copy of your city certification. When you submit this, both of those items to the IRB committee, you must CC me, because this is an assignment, and then I know that you've completed it and I can give you the points awarded here. So pay attention for that due date. If they feel that you don't cover and explain enough in that declaration exempt status form, they will tell you to do a full IRB. And remember, they're not meeting until February. So you want to make sure you take your time, take a look at the example that I put in your text, and I'll talk a little bit more about this next week. Do note, you can't start sending that parent consent letter home, doing a survey, collecting data. You can't do that until the IRB committee approves your proposal. So here's where we are, doing this literature review. Notice it's the biggest piece of the puzzle. It is the biggest piece of your thesis statement if you take a look at that 8 to 10 pages. So we've got our 3 problems laid out in the introduction. We developed that in our literature review. And then our last chapter is only 3 to 5 pages where you describe the methodology, the method that you're using, and what you're going to collect for data and how you're going to analyze it. And remember, this part is done, the abstract, and this part right here is done in 754. So I'm wishing you luck on writing this literature review. I'm anxious to read it and help you make sure that it's a solid piece of literature review. So email me if you have questions, or call me, but email works faster. I check it a couple of times a day, and I wish you well on this week.